That opening shot of The Sound of Music is really the quintessential picture postcard shot, really. And yet that we had such terrible difficulties.
Stop scrolling for 1 second, because there is a photo from The Sound of Music that people swear must be photoshopped. It is not. Nobody touched it up. What you are looking at is a real frame from one of the most beloved musicals ever made, and once you know the story behind it, you will never watch this movie the same way again. Stick around, because this film is full of moments just like it, hidden details, real-life accidents, and quiet lies that slipped past millions of viewers for 60 years. Let's start with the guitar. Julie Andrews strums it so naturally in the film that most people assume she grew up playing music around a campfire. She did not. Before filming began, Andrews had never held a guitar in her life. She had to learn the instrument from scratch while also singing on camera, hitting her marks, and acting like a woman who had played it for years. Anyone who has tried to sing and play an instrument at the same time knows how hard that coordination actually is, and Andrews was doing it in front of a film crew with the clock ticking. To calm her nerves before some of those guitar takes, she would sip a small amount of Austrian schnapps, just enough to steady her hands. Christopher Plummer, playing Captain Von Trapp, went through similar guitar and vocal training for his role, yet none of his actual singing voice made it into the finished film. The studio brought in a professional vocalist to record his singing parts instead, and that voice is what audiences have heard in every version of the movie since. Now here's where the story gets genuinely frightening. During the scene where the children capsize a rowboat on the lake, something went wrong that was never supposed to happen. Kim Carruth, who played the youngest Von Trapp child, Gretel, could not actually swim. The plan was simple on paper: the boat tips, everyone falls in, and Julie Andrews grabs the smallest child first. But when the boat actually flipped, Andrews lost her own balance and went under too, which meant nobody reached Kim in time. The young actress swallowed a large amount of lake water, choked, and became sick right there in front of the cameras, vomiting on her co-star Heather Menzies moments later. She recovered and finished the film without lasting harm, but that single unscripted moment turned a light-hearted family scene into a genuine emergency on set. Christopher Plummer's relationship with this movie is its own kind of blooper, one that lasted for decades. He was not shy about how he felt while filming. He thought the story leaned too sweet and too sentimental for his taste, and he came up with mocking nicknames for it behind the scenes, calling it things like S&M as a dark joke on the title. His frustration showed up physically. He spent much of the shoot eating and drinking more than usual to cope with his mood, and he gained enough weight that the costume department had to keep letting out his uniform to keep it fitting properly. It is a strange footnote to a film now considered one of the most wholesome in Hollywood history, that one of its leading men could barely stand being there. Decades later, Plummer softened his stance and admitted he respected just how much the film meant to audiences, even if it was never his personal favorite project. If you have ever dreamed of visiting the real Von Trapp mansion from the movie, you are chasing something that does not exist. The house on screen is a composite, stitched together from two entirely different buildings, one used for exterior front shots and a completely separate structure used for the back. Every interior scene, every hallway and staircase, was built on soundstages far from Austria. The gazebo where 16 going on 17 was filmed was constructed purely as a movie prop. It has since been moved twice and now sits at Hellbrunn Palace near Salzburg, where tourists line up to photograph it, unaware that it never belonged to any real family. Even the abbey courtyard where Maria supposedly lived as a young nun is fake, a detailed replica built by a production designer that fooled generations of visitors into thinking it was the genuine location. And the tense scene where the family hides among gravestones to escape the Nazis? That was shot entirely on a studio lot in Hollywood, thousands of miles from Austria, even though some tour guides in Salzburg still point tourists toward a spot and claim the scene happened there. Here is a detail that surprises almost everyone. Edelweiss, the gentle little song that feels like it must be Austria's unofficial anthem, is not Austrian at all. It was written in the United States, composed for the Broadway stage version of this story by the songwriting team Rodgers and Hammerstein. It turned out to be the final song the pair ever wrote together, since Oscar Hammerstein passed away only months after the stage show debuted. Despite being a completely American creation, the song became so tied to Austrian identity in the public imagination that many people around the world still assume it is a piece of genuine folk heritage. The real woman behind Maria's story never got the recognition or compensation she deserved, at least not at first. In the mid-1950s, a German producer approached the real Maria von Trapp about turning her memoir into a film and offered her a flat payment for the rights. When she asked about receiving a share of future profits, she was told that German law prevented royalty payments to anyone who was not a German citizen, and by that point she had become an American. Believing this, she signed away all rights to her own life story for a modest sum. It later came out that there was no such law at all. She had simply been misled into giving up what could have been a life-changing amount of money. To their credit, Rodgers and Hammerstein were not obligated to give the Von Trapp family anything further once the stage musical and film became hits, yet they chose to pass along a small portion of the earnings anyway. Maria herself never seemed bitter about it. She later said that the joy the story brought to people everywhere mattered more to her than what she might have earned. The job Maria was originally hired for barely resembles what audiences see on screen. She was not brought in to care for 7 children at once. In the 1920s, she was asked to tutor a single child, a daughter also named Maria, who had fallen seriously ill with scarlet fever, the same illness that had taken her mother's life years earlier. Because the girl could no longer make the long walk to school each day, the family reached out to a nearby abbey for help, and a young woman training to become a nun was sent to serve as a home tutor for just a matter of months. Life had other plans, and what was supposed to be a short assignment turned into something far more permanent. Casting the role of Maria almost went a completely different direction. The screenwriter had one actress in mind from the start, but the director initially wanted someone else entirely, considering names like a former Hollywood star who had become European royalty and stepped away from acting, along with another well-known musical performer. Everything changed when the director watched early, unreleased footage from a different project the original choice had just finished. That glimpse was enough to convince him she was exactly right for the part. She herself hesitated before accepting, worried the role might come across as overly saccharine, but once she heard that the filmmakers shared her concerns about keeping the story grounded and sincere, she signed on. It turned out to be one of the most celebrated casting decisions in film history. The real Captain Von Trapp bears little resemblance to the cold, whistle-blowing disciplinarian portrayed on screen. His actual children were reportedly upset by how strict and distant the film made their father look. Yes, he really did use a whistle with unique signals for each child, and yes, he dressed them in matching outfits, but he never marched them around like soldiers. By most accounts he was warm, generous, and easygoing, someone who simply had a lot on his plate raising a large family. If anything, it was the young governess who arrived cold and emotionally guarded from her strict upbringing, and who had to learn how to express affection over time. His youngest son later described his father in interviews as a genuinely charming and open man, nothing like the rigid figure audiences fell in love with hating. The real Maria reportedly tried to convince the filmmakers to portray her husband more accurately, but the studio stuck with the version that made for better drama. One major figure from the true story disappears entirely from the film. During the financial hardship of the Great Depression, the Von Trapps lost much of their fortune and had to rent out rooms in their home to make ends meet. One tenant happened to be a Catholic priest with serious musical training, and after hearing the family sing together, he recognized real talent and offered to shape them into a proper performing group. He became their musical director, guided their vocal technique, and eventually fled Austria alongside them, touring Europe and the United States as part of their inner circle. The film replaced him entirely with a fictional, more commercially friendly character, since the filmmakers worried that a real priest guiding the family's music would complicate the story they wanted to tell. The real Maria was nothing like the calm, obedient character shown walking quietly through convent halls. By her own later admission, she was chaotic, loud, and constantly breaking rules during her time training to become a nun. She talked when she was supposed to stay silent, ran through the courtyard when she should have been still, whistled during sacred chants, and even climbed onto the convent roof. She once described herself in an interview as about as far from a model nun as you could imagine. The mischievous, high-energy woman behind the real story was very different from the serene figure audiences came to know. Marriage did not come from a whirlwind romance either. In real life, Maria was genuinely unsure about accepting Captain Von Trapp's proposal. There was a 25-year age gap between them, and by her own account, she agreed to stay and marry him mainly out of love for his children rather than romantic feelings for him at first. She later said she believed it was fortunate he phrased his request the way he did, because if he had asked her directly and plainly to marry him, she might have said no. Real affection between them grew slowly, after the wedding, not before it. The family's dramatic escape over the mountains, satchels and violins in hand while fleeing armed soldiers, never actually happened that way. Historical records and later interviews with the family reveal a much calmer departure. They simply boarded a train in broad daylight and left the country like ordinary travelers on a trip, telling people they were heading off for a singing tour. Their trusted musical director and a family secretary traveled with them the entire way, quietly slipping across the border a day before it was sealed. From there, they moved through Italy, thanks to the captain's dual citizenship from a region that had changed hands after the First World War, then on to London, and finally by ship to the United States, where they toured the country performing before eventually settling down and opening a guest lodge that their descendants still run today. The image of a wealthy aristocratic household is also mostly fiction. The family had, in fact, lost a significant portion of their fortune when their bank collapsed during the Great Depression, forcing them to dismiss most of their household staff and start renting out spare rooms just to stay afloat. Turning to public singing was originally a financial necessity rather than a passion project, and the real captain reportedly found it painful to watch his children perform for paying audiences, not out of snobbery, but because he wanted to protect their privacy. Necessity won out anyway, and the family went on to win a major regional singing competition that helped launch their international performing career. Even the children's identities were rewritten for the screen. The real Von Trapp children, 7 from the captain's first marriage, had entirely different names, ages, and even different genders than the characters audiences remember. The eldest was actually a son already working as a doctor by the time the family fled Austria, not a teenage girl singing about growing up too fast. And the film only ever shows 7 children total, when in truth there were 10, since the captain and the real Maria went on to have 3 more children together after their wedding, none of whom appear anywhere in the story audiences know. Finally, there is the twist almost nobody realizes when they picture this cheerful, wholesome musical rescuing a struggling movie studio. In the early 1960s, the studio behind this film had poured a staggering amount of money into a separate historical epic that spiraled wildly over budget, pushing the company to the edge of bankruptcy. Executives were nervous about investing further in a genre many assumed was fading in popularity. When this film premiered, it became an unexpected sensation, eventually becoming the highest-grossing film of its year and, not long after, the highest-grossing film of all time up to that point, overtaking a record that had stood for more than 2 decades. The success of One Gentle Family musical single-handedly pulled an entire Hollywood studio back from financial ruin. So the next time someone tells you that photo from the film looks edited, you can tell them the truth is stranger than anything Photoshop could create. Behind every warm, familiar frame of The Sound of Music is a story of real accidents, real heartbreak, real deception, and real courage that never made it into the script. If this kind of hidden Hollywood history fascinates you as much as it fascinates us, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives like this one, and check out the next recommended video on your screen.